I get a good feeling, 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 yeah.
Okay, hey guys, welcome to Trojans Talk Tacos, the greatest taco show on earth.
Wait, who let him in? What are you doing here, Dennis?
I'm just here to talk about tacos.
No. This is about OT.
Tacos. No, you have to listen to me. I've got some important things to say about tacos.
Dennis, I have to stop you here. This is an OT podcast, and tacos are great. They're wonderful. I'll take you out for some tacos later, but right now, we're trying to talk about OT.
Yeah, we're talking about occupational therapy, but I like the Trojans part. Can we call this Trojans Talk OT?
Bingo. I think, Dennis, you may have accidentally helped us here.
Okay, but as long as we get some tacos later.
Okay.
That's the compromise right
Deal.
there. Okay.
Do we have anything to talk about related to OT?
Oh yeah, I went to the AOTA student conclave in Columbus, Ohio a few weekends back.
Okay.
Yeah,
tell us
pretty
more about
Do
OT.
they have tacos there?
I didn't have any tacos while I was there. So now that we've made it back to OT, I'd like to share two conversations that I had with Roger Ideishi and Ingrid Kanics, two wonderful OTs that presented the health and wellness session together, about how OT really has a place in making cultural and community-based experiences more accessible to children and families. So let's take a listen and hear what they had to say. First, can I just have you tell us who you are and what you do?
My name is Roger Ideishi, and I'm Associate Professor of Occupational Therapy at University of the Sciences in Philadelphia.
Okay, great. So we're out here at the Student Conclave in Ohio. What brought you out?
Actually, I was invited out to speak on the work that I do.
And what do you focus on? What kind of work?
The area that I focus on is really looking at community inclusion, providing access for children with disabilities and their families so that they can experience all the community experiences that everybody else does.
Right. So when you were talking to us today during your session, you mentioned that it's not just about focusing in on stereotypical perceptions of what access means. Mm-hmm. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. So oftentimes when the organizations that I work with, they're pretty adept at sort of the physical disability, the wheelchair accessibility, the visually and hearing impaired disability. They have lots of resources. They have a lot of expertise around that. What they're more challenged with are kids with learning disabilities, with sensory challenges, with cognitive challenges. It's not sort of what you think about when you think of accessibility.
You mentioned the term hidden
disabilities. Kids with autism, kids with attention deficit disorder, kids with intellectual disabilities. They look like us. They may behave differently, but oftentimes, sometimes kids with attention deficit disorder or even kids on the spectrum, sometimes the public perception of it is just that they're bratty kids and not really appreciating and understanding that they learn differently than the rest of us. And this is really, it's a challenge for them. And what we hear from families are that when they go out into the community, that they're being judged all the time, that they're bad parents, that they don't know how to handle their kids. And it's really not that they're bad parents. It's their kids they learn differently, and the kids are challenging. And so my work is really looking at how can we make the community accessible, welcoming, inviting, receptive to these families so that they feel that they are a part of society, just like we feel that we can enter any place and have a meaningful experience.
So it's not just about getting in the door.
It's not about getting in the door. It's about that sort of social access and that acceptance that they have a right to participate in society. They have a right to participate in the community like you and I.
Right, and you mentioned I think three important things: that access and opportunity
and participation. So again, part of it is getting in the door. Part of it is that social access. But then once they're there, it's not enough that they're there. It's really creating opportunities for them to learn and opportunities that are going to make that experience meaningful for them. So a lot of the work that I do is helping a lot of organizations understand how do you create that meaningful opportunity. And then I think through that process, what tends to happen is that these organizations begin to understand how to support participation at all levels for all kids. And I said during the presentation that what we're finding is that the opportunities, the strategies, the supports that we're providing aren't just for children with disabilities and their families. What we're finding is that families with typically developing kids are also valuing the same things because they want to support their kids and have a meaningful experience. And this helps them as parents to be able to provide that for their children as well. So you know, it's beyond the kids with disabilities, and so that's why this idea that inclusion really is about all children. It's you know, it includes all children, not just children with special needs.
Right. And I think, especially as students, for us, we're very, very much immersed in the medical field and thinking about teamwork, collaborating possibly with other medical professionals.
Yes.
But you emphasize the importance of including organizations that are not, specifically targeted at these communities.
Right. So the partnerships that I've created have been primarily non-health related partnerships. I do work with speech pathologists. They're probably the only health related profession that I collaborate with, but I collaborate with large organizations that their focus isn't health, with museums, with cultural arts centers, performing arts centers, collaborate with special educators, with families, with designers, with architects, with web designers, with cultural arts administrators, actors, performers. So I'm collaborating with people that really don't. Well, they may appreciate disability. They may appreciate a disability experience or the challenges that people with disabilities have. They really don't have an understanding of what they go through, and so myself and speech therapist, speech pathologists, we can sort of bring a lot of that to them. That then helps them to understand, and then they start to begin to understand how do they create these accommodations from their perspective as an actor or as a cultural arts administrator or as a ticket booth representative, things like that. So I really don't work with health professionals on these projects that I work on.
So you mentioned that you work on a lot of projects, and I'm going to bring in something that you said, that you're a failure, but you've gotten used to it.
That, I'm not afraid to try something just because it's different. And in trying things that are different, you're really taking a big risk because it's a new approach, it's a new method. There isn't a literature foundation or a research foundation for the kind of work that at least that I do. So I'm trying things that are sort of out of the box, that I'm just using my own intuition, and they don't always work. But what I found is that the majority of families that I work with, they are able to point out that it didn't work. They're able to point out the failures that I've done. But the majority of families that I work with, they appreciate the effort and that they know it's a journey, and they appreciate that someone is at least trying to address this issue because they feel so isolated, and they feel that they don't have opportunities in the community. So, some of the challenges that I did mention are changing organizational culture, just their willingness to create these access points, their willingness to change some of the ways that they approach this type of programming, funding. The funding for creating programs like this, and research methodology. That was the other one.
Okay.
Is that how do you study sort of these situations where you really can't control the community variables because they're so dynamic and they're so different from setting to setting, but even from moment to moment. going to performing arts experience in the morning versus the afternoon are very, very different. Or in the evening, it's very different. Whether you go to a musical concert versus a spoken language play, they're all very different. So how do you control all these community variables? How do you control the crowd, the audience? Sometimes it's a loud audience, sometimes it's a quiet audience. Sometimes you can't control who sits next to you. Someone who's really loud or someone who's really quiet. How do you control for those variables? So we're trying to study the impacts of this, but we're really challenged with creating good research methodologies to show impact, but we're definitely working on it. So that's another big challenge that we have.
Yeah. So you mentioned one specific example I think you highlighted a lot was this going to a performing arts event and adjusting, all of the different challenges that you run into, for example, funding. And you said, standard ticket prices could be $25 per person, and then for a family that's so inaccessible.
Right.
Or lighting, simple adjustments in lighting.
Right.
Can you maybe give some concrete examples to highlight what we're talking about here, some success stories?
Yeah. So so a recent show that we did, it had little flashlights with very loud, startling sounds. So what we did is we just worked with the crew on dialing the volume of that noise down, so that experience still occurred, but the volume was a little bit softer, so it wasn't as startling. Or when the flash, if we know that the flash is going to occur, we give some sort of indicator to the families during the show, whether with a glow light or some sort of indicator that the families can be aware of, say 15-30 seconds before that flash occurs, that the family can then be prepared to either cover the child's eyes or cover the child's ears or whatever the family knows what to do will help benefit their child. So we work with the actors, we work with the stage crew on identifying what all these points are. All the performance we've done, we've left the lights on, not at full illumination, but about half to a quarter illumination, so that families, they can see the aisles, that if kids need to get up out of their seats, they can get up out of their seats and move around the theater.
So it was really great to hear how Roger was really taking into account how families feel really left out in various cultural experiences. I mean, if you have a child that may only be able to last 5 minutes in an unfamiliar environment, how are you going to be able to take all 3 of your kids and your wife to a theater show? And that's something that every child has a right to be a part of. So that was eye-opening for me. It's not just about having, wide enough doors and ramps. It's about really making an experience accessible for a family. Another collaboration that Roger has going is with the Philadelphia International Airport in making practice flights and social stories available. So we talked a little bit about what that collaboration looks like.
The ADA coordinator at the airport with whoever the designated airline representative is, they start looking at the schedules and when planes are coming in, or are they grounded for the night or for the day? Right. When is it free? How long is it free? So usually, we have to work around those, which aren't always optimal times for families. So sometimes we're doing it really early in the morning, or we're doing it, say, after 6 o'clock at night, because that's when they ground planes. But then we have the plane.
Yeah, and then you said you talked to the TSA and security. What were some of the things you had to do?
Just the staff training, so that the TSA, I get scared sometimes going through security. So a young child, whether the child has a disability or not, it's a scary experience. So working with the staff on just communication style. Again, and one of the examples I gave you was, not asking a question when it's not a question. So,
Right.
Can you take your shoes off? That's a question, which indicates a choice. So a child interprets that as a choice, and then the answer is no, but it's really not a choice. And then it converts into, well, I just gave you a choice, you said no, but you still have to do it anyways. And so you're just creating an opportunity for that child to trigger some sort of behavior that was not the fault of that child. It was really the fault of the adults. So, instead of saying, can you take your shoes off, it's really, you need to take your shoes off now, and you're going to get your shoes back when you walk through that gate. And that can change the whole context and the whole idea for that child about what's going to happen. But, by asking the child a question, and again, most airports now, kids don't have to take their shoes off, but, they still have to take off their belts and things like that. When you pose that question to that child, the child now can't trust that situation, and that something, something else unpredictable might happen, and so that child then their anxiety goes up, which just sort of may elevate everything else.
I mean, even the most put together family, it's a very tense situation.
Exactly.
Everybody in that line is stressed. And so even if everything's going smoothly with that child, you're surrounded by all of these high stress level people that it's very influential.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of staff training is what we've really found to be one of the biggest impacts. Staff, in addition to staff training, but also educating and working with families and helping families know how to advocate for themselves and to be able to communicate with security staff, as long as that security staff is aware and open to supporting this family.
And supporting families is really what OT is all about. This next conversation I had with Ingrid Kanics was basically about just that, and making play experiences more accessible for families. Can you start out with just who you are and where you're coming from?
Sure. So my name is Ingrid Kanics. I live in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, which is north of Pittsburgh, towards Youngstown, Ohio. And my field of expertise in the world of OT is looking at universal and inclusive play spaces, so both indoor and outdoor, so children's museums in general. Some work with preschools, not to the same degree, and then playgrounds, so work with outdoors.
So what motivated you to come out here to talk to all of us students at the Conclave?
Well, I'll be honest with you, I've done this presentation every year since the Conclave has started. So I can say that I'm one of the originals.
Nice.
I think there's two things for me. I think it's, first of all, that it's such an out-of-the-box kind of piece of the profession that I do. But the other piece that I feel is really important is helping students understand that they can be out of the box, and they can be out of the box pretty quickly when they graduate, so that the courses that you're taking create a viewing lens that you can look at anything that you're passionate about, anything that occupies people's time, and that there's opportunities to do that.
So just highlighting the strengths of that.
Right. And to really, as I said in the presentation, to really take those volunteer experiences when you do them in school, or if you've got that class assignment that involves going to some community group, that, especially if it's a group you choose. So whatever kind of your hobbies and interests are, that can be very fulfilling.
Or exactly your situation. So maybe we can touch on your experience.
Right. So literally, I ended up in OT school because of a spinal cord injury, an incomplete spinal cord injury that actually limited what I could physically do, like in a therapeutic setting. So then I really started looking at, okay, what can I do in a non-therapeutic setting, or how can I, one of the things we're trained to look at is environments, as well as what can I do for the person. How do I increase their function? The other piece is, how do I look at the environment and where it's creating barriers for this person? So if it's in their home, if it's in their community, how do we begin to eliminate some of those barriers? And those barriers could be physical, they can be socioeconomic, so those are all pieces.
Yeah, so, and you were actually pushed to start asking that while you were still in school, and this was, I guess, your first introduction to the career field that you're in now happen as a result of a school project?
Right, so my work at the Center for Creative Play actually came out of a class assignment. So it was part of our Occupational Therapy Administration course where, you learned a lot of those things like supervision and paperwork and those type of things. But then we also were given kind of this out-of-the-box assignment of, a team of 3 of you are assigned to a nonprofit. You need to do a needs assessment at that nonprofit, pick a need, design a program through your OT lens of how can you meet that need, and then actually identify funders that would be able to fund that. And there's used resources out there when you're looking at grant funding. So there's a wonderful organization called the Foundation Center, which is housed in New York but is available online, and they basically give you information on every foundation in the country, and so you can do searches through that as to whatever topic area you're looking at, and then they'll generate the list of who are the foundations that fund that type of thing, and you get the whole background on that foundation and how often they accept proposals and how they accept proposals. So there's, and then it really becomes about writing what the program is, what's the needs meeting, and those are all things that we can do as OTs, that we can, we do the needs assessment. There's a need in this community that's not being met. This is the program that we're designed to meet that need and why, and this is how much money we need and why.
And really, I think what was important for you was getting the buy-in for the people involved. You mentioned someone that was opposed to OT when you walked in. Right.
So when we first went to this organization, the director, said to us, we don't do therapy here. We're not a therapeutic site, and her personal experience with occupational therapy had actually been really negative, and she made that very clear that she knew what bad OT was. And so the group of 3 of us kind of looked at each other like, oh my gosh, we picked to be here, and what did we just get ourselves into? But we stuck to our guns, and we were able to show her. I just remember clearly saying to her, therapy doesn't have to look like therapy. We can do things in this facility that can have a very strong therapeutic underpinning to them, but it doesn't have to look like therapy at all. And I think really that's what good therapy is that if we really do our job well, people aren't stopping and saying, oh, well, that was a therapeutic intervention. If we're doing design well, people shouldn't say, oh, that was added on, going back to your comment about, the cutout curbs. If it's really designed well, people aren't saying, oh, well, that was just put in for somebody who's using wheeled access. Really good design is design that supports as many people as possible. And that's where universal design comes in, which is much stronger than ADA.
Yeah. And I think also, being a part of an OT student generation that's really being pushed, we're having the centennial vision pounded into us, and we're thinking about evidence-based practice. You're expanding to that with your assessment in areas that are completely different from the settings that we're traditionally exposed to.
Correct.
So can you tell us a little bit about what you did with assessments and stuff and what you're working on?
Well, a lot of times when I go to AOTA conference, we hear about home modifications, and there's times where I sit there and I go, we could do more than just home modifications. We can do things in the community. And so really the work that I started with the Children's Museum was to try to come up with a way of looking at that access. And starting with the tools that are there, like the ADA audit. That's there. It's a good tool. There are different ways to do it. There are different kind of permutations of it. It all gets you to the same place. And that's legally what they're required to do. So to make sure they're at least doing the legal limit is a starting point. To me, that's always the minimum. Then the next piece is then to begin to build on that and take them to the next level. And so part of that was creating this universal design assessment tool that looks at the 7 principles and how they fit with, let's say, a specific exhibit area, and identify what they're doing well, because I think we also need to accentuate what people are doing well. And they may not be intentionally doing it. It may happen purely by accident. But even just creating that awareness is creating a higher level of knowledge. And it's also something that they can market, they can talk about. We have a water table that has multiple heights that children can access, whether they're using a mobility device or not. Kids come in different sizes, people come in different sizes. So that's again, good design. So helping them see that piece, and then maybe if they're falling short or they're just meeting ADA minimum, then to make a suggestion of how can you take this to a higher level. And sometimes it's not physically about adding a ramp. So for example, at the Cleveland Children's Museum, they have this wonderful exhibit that was a farmhouse or a barn, and off the barn was a silo, and so you would go up like 4 or 5 stairs to a landing, and the silo was beside it, and it had these holes where you could put all these fruits and vegetables that you had picked down on the ground level, which everybody could get to, and they go through the silo and they come out at the bottom through these different tubes. And so that was the biggest play element. But obviously a child using a walker with limited mobility can't get up to the landing. And so they had said, well, we could try to put a lift over on this side of the silo. And I said, I do feel it's important for children who use wheel mobility to get up high and have that perspective of the world. But in this particular case, it was really all about creating interaction at the silo. And so my recommendation was for them to buy a pulley and put it on the side of the silo with a basket and a rope that, I could be in my chair and I can wheel around and get all the fruits and vegetables, and I go over to the basket and my friend's up there or my parents up there or my siblings up there or somebody I don't know is on the landing, and I pull it up to them and they put the stuff down the hole and I gather it down at the bottom, and we've now created an inclusive play experience. And when you talk to parents who have children with special needs, one of the things they want the most is for their children to be part of the play experience. I don't necessarily want them to be separate playing, if we put a lift, okay, they're over there, typical kids over here. They just want their children to have friends. They want their children to be able to play and engage with other children like any other child would. And that doesn't always necessarily mean, as Roger said in the presentation, that they have access to everything. It's the quality of what they're accessing and the quality of the relationships that are built in that process. So in that particular case, I didn't feel it was important to get the height element. It was the relationship interaction element that was a key piece to the experience. There are other times where, if the element is really about being high, okay, how do we do that? And how do we do that within the footprint that we're working in? Or if we're outside, how can we use the natural topography to create access to height? And, so it's a lot of brainstorming, it's a lot of problem solving. But again, we're bringing that lens of how do we adapt the environment? How do we, we understand what might be a strength or a weakness for a child depending on their disability. How do we bring that all in and have that dialogue with the family and the dialogue with the developers and come up with a solution that works for everybody? Because if everybody comes up with a solution, then everybody owns it.
And it's a collaboration. Right.
Whereas if I say, you got to do this, they're not going to own it. And I don't necessarily have all the answers. And that's the piece of knowing that everybody kind of at the table has a piece of the answer. Gotcha. And we have to help facilitate that.
So great conversations with both Roger and Ingrid. We want to thank them again for helping us out with this podcast. And remind you guys to check in and see what new episodes we have coming out. You can see more about our podcast contributors at our webpage under the News and Events tab of the USC OT Division webpage. Check it out. See what music we had playing on this episode. We have all of the music information as well as our contact information. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please let us know. All right. This was Trojans Talk OT, and we hope to get you back again soon.